This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien kicks off today's show with a grain market update. He discusses the futures market and what yield forecasts are from crop analysts. Continuing the show is Mike Stamm, K-State canola breeder, with considerations for canola growers as the planting window for winter canola has started. He explains what conditions are ideal to plant in. Chip Redmond, K-State meteorologist, ends the show with a weather update. He talks about the recently quiet weather week and the warm and dry weather we can be expecting. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Friday show with the grain market update with K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
Dan, what are futures looking like right now in the grain market?
Well, we've had some gains over the last couple of weeks. They're not, we haven't fully regained to the areas that we had last summer or 12, 18 months ago, but we have seen some gains from lows of, for instance, say around August 23rd. We've had closes yesterday on December futures of 410 and 3/4. We were at 391 for D's futures a couple of weeks ago. For November futures, we closed on yesterday at 1023 and a half. We were at 973, so a 50-cent gain from where we were again 2 weeks back. And then for wheat, we were for the D's contract at 588 3/4 yesterday for a close. We were sitting at 535 a couple of weeks ago. And we still are trading the September contract, but it's in delivery period. When you go on to market information sites and see how many contracts are still trading there, not very many. Most traders have gotten out of the September contracts, have rolled into, again, D's, at least the D's contract for the December contract for corn and for wheat, and November for soybeans. So I guess that kind of begs the question, so why the gain? I think we have had some, I think two factors. We have had some reports of some crop stress, at least a little more worry and uncertainty in different parts of the country. Again, more so in the Ohio, eastern Indiana area, parts of Kansas not doing as well, particularly dryland crops in the western part of the state for the most part. When you look at up into the Dakotas and parts of Nebraska, we've had not bad crops, but again, we had the Independent Crop Tour come through a week or so ago and pointed out how some of those areas were at least uneven, as I've been talking about, and not doing just tremendously. So we've got that in play, and we have coming up next week on Thursday, September the 12th, the USDA NASS crop production report, as well as the WASDE report, World Ag Supply and Demand Estimates. Those two come out of the same lockup, literally. So that will bring some uncertainty into the market. And I talked about this before we came on to the air. So we had the August 1st crop production estimates, which are almost totally what farmers thought they had on August 1st. And the markets responded, dropped sharply lower. Well, since then now, we've had some dryness and some other maladies come in domestically, and some worries internationally in South America, of course, on corn anyway. And seen markets prices come up a bit. So the USDA was out in the fields around September 1st, so just a few days ago, that those surveys wrapping up of what they actually saw with their objective yield surveys, and also surveyed farmers. So still, though, we're we're not finalized. We still have a fair amount of uncertainty about what the final numbers will be. And it's kind of a battle of which part of the country you're from. Again, Central Corn Belt, Illinois, parts of Iowa, parts of Indiana, tremendous looking yields, just tremendous. But it's on the fringes, on the margins, where the questions will come in. So we'll get the September report, but other than a few areas way down south, southern U.S., we're not doing any harvesting yet. When we actually get to the October report, we'll have at least started harvest in some of these areas, wet corn being cut, and you name it, and we'll have all that much more of an accurate picture on the October and November reports, and then again in the January final crop production numbers. So, September's a big month. We have that crop production report and the WASDE report coming out on next Thursday. And then at the end of the month, we have the grain stocks report that'll come out. And really the grain stocks reports, the September grain stocks reports, I guess do at least a couple things. First of all, tell us what the amount of grain use is, the final total quantity for the most recent quarter ending September 1. So would that be, I think June, July, August, there you go, the summer quarter. So we'll have those numbers, but also in the September reports, the USDA has a pattern here of late of basically once they get those four quarterly reports together and they do their mathematics and calculations on how much grain's used here, there, whatever, that's where they've came back in past years and made some changes, some fairly substantial 50, 80 million bushels on either way, a lot of it lower on previous crops. So I think any adjustments to be made in the 2023 crop or even 2022, probably 23, that's likely to come out there. So September is a month of where the markets will still be watching what's set for corn, soybeans, grain, sorghum, spring wheat, all of that will all be there, but there'll still be uncertainty just because September 1 we weren't cutting much. But man, gracious, once we get to into the October report with October 1 conditions and especially November, then we'll be able to nail this down. There are independent reports that have come out ahead in the last week ahead of our program have been confirming of pretty high yield expectations, 182, 183, thereabouts. As one analyst said, well, we're all singing from the same choir book, in that's the expectation. So it'll be good to see how, well, it'll be really important, not just good, important, to see how that actually plays out once we get in the fields. I don't think anybody's expecting a huge drop in actual production, but I think there is still uncertainty about whether we'll get 182, 183, or we're more like 179, 180. So I think the approach taken in those models is going to be pretty important to consider. So I just want to say real quickly that we've had pretty good, very good usage for all these crops. Low prices tends to help usage, so that's certainly been an issue, and some wheat issues over in the Black Sea region and in the EU that have cut back production. So that's been somewhat supportive. And bioenergy changes in India, they've switched over. They're switched over big into corn-based ethanol. So now they're an importer rather than an exporter. That's important. And we're just starting the planting season down in Argentina and Brazil for crops, and it's really, really dry. It's like a delayed La Nina impact that we were worried about all summer, but now it's here. And when you look at the materials we put together internationally, it's dry down in especially in Brazil, and there's kind of a disease, leaf, insect disease plague that's impacted corn in Argentina is forecast down about 20% as farmers deal with that. So we got things happening, and we'll see where we go as we head off into harvest.
And Dan, today, wanting to take the time to mention a question that you have received from a farmer this past week, because could bring some insight to our other Kansas farmers as well.
I was contacted by a farmer from the northeast Kansas, Atchison area. I was talking about the generally pretty good yield expectations in that area, and was wondering how to wrestle with harvest sales versus post-harvest storage opportunities. And as he and I were talking on this, I kind of came to the conclusion that that's pretty hard, especially with in an area like that where they have anticipation of a lot of grain coming, to see that on the one hand that basis will be very good. There'll be a lot of grain, pretty much probably all filling up storage, and maybe some having to wait too. So that's a negative for that type of situation. And we talked about how these USDA reports, again, September, but especially October, November, could change the game a bit if U.S. yields aren't as sterling as has been projected. So that's something to watch for. But then there were the big wild cards in the corn market, probably the South America situation. As we bounce back and forth is where the markets are concerned, what they're concerned with. So out of all that, of course, after we spoke, he was probably having the syndrome of wanting an economist that gave him one answer and not three, So, but yet all those factors are out there. And I don't doubt that in a situation like that, you probably hold back to look at cash flow needs and sell what you have to generate cash. And if you do have storage, you probably store to see if the situation changes. Because again, once the U.S. crop is in, the market shifts its attention away from U.S. domestic supply to usage in international markets. And given all that's going on in Europe right now in the Black Sea region, and what the uncertainty in South America, that the market right now is assuming won't be an issue. It's assuming it won't. If those things do come about, they probably give for corn and for soybeans some higher prices that would reward storage. So it's kind of a step-by-step managing of risks and financial realities to deal with this situation. You probably sell what you have to generate cash, and then watch and see what develops through December, January, March, and then make your best profit maximizing, cost minimizing decision.
Dan, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and give us our grain market update.
Thank you very much, Shelby. I appreciate the opportunity.
That was K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about winter canola planting with K-State canola breeder Mike Stamm. Mike, thanks for joining us today.
I'm glad to be here.
Mike, planting time for winter canola is here, and what does that full planting window look like for winter canola?
Yeah, so here we are. It's the start of September, and it's time to plant winter canola. And if you're in the northern part of the state, we definitely want to be thinking about here in the next 10 days, getting the crop seeded. Northwest and southwest Kansas, you're kind of in that same boat. Those first 10 to 15 days of September are really critical for planting. If you move on into the central part of the state, the September 15th to September 25th window is really kind of key for that particular part of the state. And then as you move into that southern tier of counties, we've got a little bit more time there. So September 20th to really October 5th about is that time where you want to get the crop seeded. But it all kind of depends on what your soil moisture conditions are right now as to whether or not you're ready to go or not.
And what are those moisture conditions or weather conditions that would be ideal to plant winter canola into?
Kind of continued the same story on from the summer, that it's a little bit variable at this point in time. And so it really just depends on kind of the individual area, county, farmer, how his land is prepped. Hopefully if the farmer is using tillage, he's done that tillage early and maybe caught one of these sporadic showers on the ground to help settle it. And so then you've got a little bit of a nice crust on the soil, and the moisture could potentially be there. We don't want overworked soil this time of the year because, again, the rains have been pretty variable across the state. And so if you have an overly worked, fluffy soil, that's not good for planting canola in. We want a more firm seed bed. And so planting into that stale seed bed, one that has been worked and then rained on, actually works really well. But then if you're using no tillage, there's a potential to have some soil moisture there if you've got the residue cover. But we want to remember, if we are using no tillage, we need to move that residue out of the seed row because canola really doesn't like residue competition in the seed row.
For canola, what different things might a grower want to think about when selecting their varieties?
Well, Right now, the big question on growers' minds when it comes to varieties is whether or not they're going to pick an open pollinated variety or a hybrid variety. That really seems to be the number one question on their minds. The OPs have obviously been around for a long time, and we're still primarily an open pollinated driven market, but hybrids are becoming more and more popular. And so either variety type can excel in our environmental conditions, and each one has particular advantages over the other. And so it's an important question to think about. Some of the OP advantages are they're generally more winter hardy. We have the glyphosate herbicide tolerance in the OP varieties as well, which is important for some growers that want the broad spectrum weed control. That technology is not available in hybrids right now. And in general, the hybrids tend to be higher yielding, and they also typically have higher oil content. And so those are some opportunity costs that producers have to weigh when they think about, what specific varieties they're going to plant.
And as they're planting these varieties into crop rotations, what are some things they might want to think about and where they're putting winter canola into their rotation?
Winter canola really fits best behind winter wheat, and the main reason there is there's an opportunity for some of the soil moisture recharge to happen because that wheat ground has been fallow over the summer months, and hopefully they've left their residue there, and that's helped to incorporate some soil moisture into the profile. Winter wheat is really the easiest crop to follow because that land is readily available. Now, some producers would like to follow an early corn, and maybe it's corn that's been harvested wet for high moisture purposes, or it's corn that's been harvested for silage. That gets a little bit more tricky because you can run into issues with herbicide plant-back restrictions for canola. A lot of the commonly used herbicides in corn production have long plant-back restrictions for canola, so that's something we really have to take into consideration. Now, if you look at the e-update article we recently provided on this, there are some options there that could provide shorter plant-back restrictions, but it's really something we have to focus on in corn production and be proactive about selecting shorter plant-back restriction products when we're planning to follow corn with canola. Wheat, it gets a little bit easier. We still have common use of sulfonylurea herbicides in wheat, and those tend to have longer plant-back restrictions. However, some of the varieties that we grow of canola have tolerance to that SU residual in the soil. We're also seeing a trend to where growers aren't using as many SUs now because there are other herbicide-tolerant options for wheat production now than there were 10 or 15 years ago. And so it's a little bit easier, to follow wheat with canola because those plant-back restrictions aren't as difficult to sort out.
Are there some disease management considerations when it comes to what you're thinking about putting in for the crop rotation? Well,
we typically like to follow a grass species when we're planting winter canola as the next crop because there aren't any crossover disease issues between wheat, canola, corn, and canola. Now, if we were following a soybean that was harvested on the very early side of things, if white mold was an issue, that could potentially be an issue then in canola. But we typically don't see that just because of our environmental conditions in Kansas aren't real conducive to white mold in soybean, unless you're in the far northeastern part of the state. But again, typically we're not really following soybean with canola, but it could happen.
And are there any insects that we'd be thinking about as canola gets put into the ground?
Typically, we recommend using an insecticidal seed treatment on our canola seed. That helps primarily with controlling any type of aphid pressure we might have at emergence. We're really fortunate in the southern Great Plains to not have flea beetle pressure, which is a major issue in places like Europe and Canada. And so insects typically aren't a huge problem until that crop is up and growing for a month or so. And then, the thing that we have to think about after emergence really in the fall is the diamondback moth pressure that we can have.
So as producers are getting ready to go into the field, what are some thoughts on seeding rate, seeding depth, row spacing for them?
Well, their soil moisture, again, is going to kind of determine what that seeding depth is. And typically I like to plant canola about 1 inch deep. And we really don't want to go any deeper than about 1.5 inches with canola. Again, it's a small seed that has to emerge for that growing point to be above the soil surface. And if we bury that seed and then potentially have heavy rain, we could have some crusting issues with canola. So, really that inch is about optimal, in my opinion. For seeding rates, over the years as we've worked with the crop, we've tended to see lower seeding rates because we just haven't seen the advantages to having an overabundance of canola plants in the field. And so we've modified them somewhat, to where, it's roughly in the 3 pound per acre to 4 pound per acre if you're in a narrow row for a seeding rate. And then if you're using a wider row, for instance, a 30-inch row spacing, then, we're talking more in line of 2 to 2.5 pounds to the acre. That's really where we've kind of landed over the last several years.
Mike, so really important just to watch the forecast and the weather to hopefully hit an ideal time for planting?
Yeah, that's correct. And projecting, fairly dry conditions now through the month. So it's a little bit of a kind of wait and see, if we're going to pick up some moisture, if it in fact is too dry in some areas to plant right now. So we'll just kind of see what Mother Nature gives us. If conditions were favorable right now, I would be thinking pretty strongly about getting that canola seeded. It's hard to wait on rain, and so if the moisture is there, I would be considering it, especially as here we are in the month of September.
Mike, I appreciate you taking the time to join us and share some thoughts around winter canola planting.
Again, happy to be here.
That was Kansas State University canola breeder Mike Stamm. If you'd like to read more on these topics that he talked about today involving winter canola planting considerations, you can do so by checking out the August 29th Agronomy e-Update newsletter. It is issue 1018. In that e-Update newsletter, there are 3 articles attached to winter canola planting. The first one is titled Winter Canola Planting Considerations. The next one is Winter Canola Management Considerations. And finally, the last one is titled Planting Winter Canola. Be aware of rotation restrictions with herbicides. I will link all 3 of these Agronomy e-Update articles in today's show notes on agtoday.net, or you can find them for yourself by going to eupdate.agronomy.ksu.edu. Again, that is eupdate.agronomy.ksu.edu. While you're there, you can also sign up to receive their weekly e-newsletters. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because when we come back, we'll be joined by K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond with this week's weather update. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Friday show with a weather update with K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Chip, first wanting to mention some rain we saw last week, and just how much rain did we get?
Yeah, like always, it's still the back end of summer, and so we get convective precipitation, which tends to favor isolated downpours. But for the most part, about 80% of the state saw precipitation. The one exception was in the far northwest, and the other small exception was in the southeast, where they didn't see very much measurable precipitation, but 1/2 inch to 3/4 inches was about the average, and then the higher amounts were from portions of southwest Kansas that extended to north central Kansas with over 1 inch in isolated areas. A much needed rain to hopefully finish out some of the later summer crops like soybeans and sorghum, and then put a little bit of moisture into the ground for the upcoming wheat planting that I know people are eyeing right now, and they're starting to get a little antsy about that. So it was timely. A lot of those places hadn't seen precipitation for the last week, and after some warm temperatures a week before, we needed some moisture to help recover the soil profile especially. So needed precipitation. That led to drought changes, mostly overall in the state. We still have over 90% of the state in D0 or worse drought drought conditions, but we did see some improvements, mostly in the southwest where some of those heavier precipitation amounts fell. And then we saw some degradations in central and eastern Kansas, mostly expansion of abnormally dry conditions there, where the trend is kind of flipped back after some good reprieve there in August with moisture. They started to dry back out again, and they missed some of those timely precipitation events like last week.
And Chip, before the interview, you described this most recent week of weather as a quiet weather week.
Yeah, you could still get some pretty dynamic weather this late in the summer, and honestly, we just didn't have much. It was sunny, had some periods of smoke in there, but overall, very normal temperatures to slightly below normal temperatures, and no high impact weather. And I guess, that sometimes that gets taken for granted. And we had a beautiful Labor Day weekend that we just don't see that a ton. We typically see hot weather with our summer holidays. So a really nice weather week. We had a high pressure that was focused over our region that was moderating compared to what we saw the last time we had a high pressure set up when we saw those 100-degree temperatures. Very much more moderated air mass. It's kind of a sign of things to come. We are slipping towards the later part of the year. And so our temperatures and precipitation our averages start to fall as we get later in the year. And so we need to not take for granted these nice days and enjoy them while we have them.
And as we look forward through the next few weeks, what can we be expecting, Chip?
Yeah, so we had a cold front that came through Friday morning and late Thursday night. It brought some areas of scattered precipitation. That's going to bring cooler weather for the next 2 days. We're talking about 10 degrees below normal, depending on where you're at in the state. But we'll be cooler, and then come Sunday, we start to turn warmer. High pressure starts to shift back east into the region. That's going to allow temperatures to come back up to about 10 degrees above normal. We're talking in the low 90s for most of the state. You could see some mid-90s in the southwest. A notable thing is we're going to see an increase in the winds as well, where we're going to have breezy winds. We're getting to that time of the year where winds start to increase. August is typically our least windiest time of the year. So September is an increase, and we'll see some gusts up to 30 miles an hour with those warmer temperatures. That's not necessarily a good thing with dry conditions expected. We're going to dry out those soils again really quickly, and I don't think blowing dust or anything will be an issue at this point, but we might lose some of that surface moisture that we gained with last week's precipitation event.
As we look more ahead, what might we be seeing for October?
Yes, this dry pattern will persist, I think, through the end of September. We're watching maybe the potential for an increase in precipitation with a pattern change that's going to come into early October. We'll watch that. It's got a little ways to go. It's got to come around the globe a little bit further. Right now it's over the West Pacific, but that's something to watch as we go over for maybe a pattern change.
Chip, I appreciate you taking the time to join us once again and give us our weather update.
Yep, thanks for having me.
That was K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. That's all we have for you this week on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you on Monday.